Hi, this is Jeff Locklear with H&H Color Lab, and in this video tutorial we're going to look at our green screen program, specifically the green screen lighting diagrams, kind of walk through our formula for doing this for volume photography, and kind of talk through a few of the issues and concerns and some of the pitfalls in lighting for green screen. It can be very, very specific. And I tell people that the lighting diagram is actually very, very simple to follow. There's nothing special about it, nothing difficult other than metering it properly, but it's very simple to set up. But it's probably the one failing part for most people because they don't take into consideration all of the pieces that we've already researched and use the type of light modifiers and light position, hair lights, and that sort of thing. That's usually where the problems are. So let's go ahead and get started with that. With our H&H green screen program, basically what we're doing in green screen is we're lighting the subject with a main and a fill light, and we're allowing the light from the main and fill to fall off of the subject and also illuminate the background. The reason we do that is it can be very difficult to bring extra lights along to light your background with, because the key elements with that green background, with that chroma key green, is to light it evenly without any shadows or any wrinkles showing in it. So that's why we have some real specifics as far as the type of background we want you to use and the material it's made out of. We really like for you to use the Say Cheese background. And again, all this information is on the website, so I'm not going to cover everything in great detail. But you can order that by clicking on the link on our website. But it's a canvas background. The reason we like the canvas is it doesn't have wrinkles in it. There aren't wrinkling problems. The other nice thing about it is one of the issues we're concerned about is you'll notice that the subject here is 5.5 feet from the background. And that's very, very specific because we're trying to avoid a phenomena of what we call just blowback, light being bounced off the background and coming and wrapping back around the subject, causing some green haloing, that sort of thing. So we've got to have the subject a certain distance from a minimum amount of distance from the background. Plus, we don't want a background that reflects too much. Sometimes the vinyl backgrounds can be too reflective, so you have to look out for that. The other thing you'll notice is that with the background that we recommend, it's really kind of a real luminous, ugly, bright, fluorescent green. And if you look at green screen backgrounds from different manufacturers, they're all varying shades of green. They're all kind of the same green, but the luminosity of them is a little bit different. Because we're wanting to use the light falling off from the main and the fill, we want our background to be, without any light on it, already a little bit brighter. That's why this specific background works better for our formula if you're going to use our program. Okay, so real important, the background material, the type that it is, wrinkle free, shadow free, those are the things we have to avoid. Okay, so if you're using a muslin background that has wrinkles in it, you can't get those wrinkles out, you're going to have a problem. If you're using some of these pop out reflector type backgrounds that are more of kind of like a felt fabric, those things will eat light, so you don't get enough luminance off of that green. So we've done a lot of research to get the right type of backgrounds that work with our process. The other piece of that is, or another background that we recommend is a Savage background. It's a paper background. You can get it in 9 feet wide lengths, and it'll roll out on the floor. It's a little easier to do some 3/4 length than using some of those full-length type programs like we offered last year in 2012. So, having said that, that's the importance of the background. So, keep in mind, our main light and our fill light, they're going to illuminate the subject plus the background. So we have to have the type of light modifier that throws a lot of light around and allows a lot of light fall off. And the simplest one to use is an umbrella. If you have it in your arsenal or in your mind that you want to use a softbox, you're not going to get the same kind of light carry from the subject to the background. So your backgrounds will be darker and you'll have problems. That's why we recommend the umbrellas. Just stick with those. I think they're made by Westcott. They're 45-inch. They're a flat bottom satin umbrella. Again, that information is on our website. They throw a lot of light around. We set up a lighting diagram, or a light pattern, light ratio. It's a 3-to-1 lighting ratio. So the way we meter our fill light and our main light to get our working aperture, which is f8, is by first turning on that fill light by itself using a calibrated light meter and measuring that light value to where it's 4.5 at the subject position. And again, that's with that subject 5.5 feet from the background. All right, now that we've got our fill light set correctly, leave the fill light on, turn your main light on so that they're both firing at the same time. Okay, now with both of them firing, we want the combined value of those two lights at subject position to be equal to f8. f8 is going to be the aperture we're going to use at the camera for the camera. Okay, and in most cases I like to shoot an ISO of 100. So it's ISO 100, 125th of a second or 60th of a second shutter speed. That's, you know, not a real big problem as long as you use one of those two. And we want to be at a minimum aperture of f8. Do not get in the habit, or don't try to use a wider aperture for a shallower depth of field, because the problem you're going to get into there is you're not going to get a good sharp clean edge around your subject, allowing for an appropriate knockout. We'll get some flaring and some green fringing, and sometimes that little black line you'll see on the edge, and I'll show you that in some examples a little bit later on. So it's imperative that your aperture is f8 or f11. And actually we're doing some testing right now, and it looks like we're going to start recommending perhaps even f11 because of that back shoulder being a little bit further away from the camera itself. Okay, so combined together, those two lights are f8. Very simple to do. You see we have positioning for them, and the reason for all the measurements and that sort of thing is in volume photography we want consistency from rig to rig, from day to day. So we actually have a diagram that we lay out on the floor, measure everything out with a tape measure. We set our heights of our lights specifically to the same thing every time. As you can see, the main light itself is 60 inches high, and the height of the fill light is 66, and they're at a specific distance from the center point. That's just primarily for consistency's sake. Now, the one light I want to be real careful and explain and talk about in a little bit more detail is the hair light. Okay, I'm a big proponent of using a hair light in any kind of portrait work. It's very easy to get away from a hair light in school photography and volume work because it's just one more thing to have to carry. And in some cases, some folks say, and please don't be offended by my conversation about this, is, you know, I don't have time to deal with it. My customers will never notice. It's not necessary. Well, in my opinion, my background, I want to use a hair light because it makes a portrait look that much better. All right. So, having said that, and I'm going to show you some images of the hair light so you get a better idea of what it is. We recommend using a small, about a 14 by 14 inch softbox, or you can use a small strip light that's maybe 8 by 20, that sort of thing. But a small softbox to illuminate our subjects with. Okay, we don't put it on the background up here way back in the back. Okay, we like to put it on a boom. Again, I'll show you some photographs so that it's just above the subject's head and a little bit behind him, so that we have, and again, I think of it as a separation light. It's not necessarily a hair light, but it's a separation light. And I want that light measured with the dome of the meter pointed up at that hair light. I want it to read somewhere around 5.6, not much more than that, because I want to set it and leave it. So I want it to be able to handle somebody with really dark hair all the way to somebody with really light hair. All right. The issue with the hair light is if that hair light becomes too specular, too strong, too contrasty, too sharp, and you overlight the hair, then you get hair that glows, and green kind of gets caught up in that translucent glow, and you can't get rid of it. All right, so if you don't want to use a boom with a small softbox, you don't want to get into that, you don't want to mess with it, please don't use another form of hair light that's real specular, because it's going to cause you all kinds of problems. All right, so what we'll do now is we've kind of covered the idea, the process, the setup of our lighting diagrams, and like I said, they're very simple. We've got this one specifically. This is kind of an average lighting diagram that you could use for Head and Shoulders in the fall, and very easily for a 3/4 length standing pose too. We've got a little bit different lighting diagram that we use for our full length stuff that we had in our 2012 spring program. You can see that and look at that on the web. That's available for you to look at too. It's a little bit more creative lighting. There's some issues that we're dealing with there, but for the purpose of this, we're talking about just traditional average green screen technical details here. So what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and move in. I'm going to show you some samples of the hair light so you kind of get an idea of that, because again, that hair light is extremely important for you all to take into consideration. Okay, so what I want to do here now is I want to give you an idea of positioning of the hair light, what it actually looks like. The lighting diagrams don't lend itself to that very well, so this is I did some shots in the studio at the lab, so you could kind of get an idea of what we're looking for. So what we've got is we have a stand that's holding up our actual background, okay? Then a boom arm that comes off from that has a very lightweight type of a head. Doesn't matter what that is, you want it just to be extremely lightweight so it doesn't weight down the boom. You can also see that we use a sandbag to kind of give that some extra weight at the base of it so it doesn't tip over. You always have to think about things like that. But you'll notice, okay, and this distance is not accurate. I just set it up like this for the purpose of being able to photograph it and show it. But you see where the subject sits, that hair light isn't directly over them. It's a little bit behind them and angled down. It's not going to influence the background. It's not going to cause any shadowing, okay? But it's enough that we're going to get a nice light falling down on the shoulders and the hair of our subjects. A little bit closer up look, you can see there's your boom. And that's a Larson softbox. Those are a little bit pricey. You can always find soft boxes that are a little bit less expensive for this type of a light. Okay, so that shows you what it looks like, and then a little bit better angle of it there too. So it's just that's a standard Bogen or Manfrotto boom arm, and when you buy those, they come in a section of 3 different lengths. And what I've done on ours is I take it down to 2. That's just enough. It's not terribly long, but it's just enough to get it out away from the background and in a position that works well for the subjects. Okay? So like I said, if you've got the room like this to work in, that's great. Use the hair light. If you find yourself in a situation where you don't have that type of ceiling height, and maybe you can put that hair light on another kind of a stand and maybe use it as a separation light back behind the subject, you might want to try that too. But if you run into scenarios where it's just not working, then please stay away from the other type of light source, which we'll show you here, which is something like this, is what we see traditionally is used in school photography. Okay, so we've got a monolight up on the stand that's holding your background, and there'll usually be a grid spot or something on that, but that's a very specular light source that comes down and hits the back of the head of the subject, top of the hair. And the idea is it's very simple to use. It's a lot easier to put that light up than it is to carry a boom and do all these other things. Okay, the issue is this type of a light is much more specular and can cause you those problems. So I just want to kind of show you, this is what we don't want to see. If this is the type of hair light that you're planning on using, you're going to have problems. You really are. What we see happen with these is quite often when that light, and again I'll show you some samples here in just a few minutes, when that light comes off of the subject's head, you may meter it with the dome of the meter pointed back at the light source, and it may meter at 5.6. But when you come around to camera position and look at it from a different angle, there's something called the angle of incidence, and it's basically the way light bounces and reflects off of an object. A real good way to kind of visualize this or see it is go out about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, hopefully on a sunny day, and look at the way the sun will reflect off of water, off of a pond or something like that. And you see the way that sun hits it, reflects into your eye, and it becomes extremely bright. That's caused by the angle of incidence, the way that light's reflecting off of that shiny surface. It can even be a dark surface and it'll cause that. That's what we see coming back at the camera when that light bounces off the hair and comes into the camera. It's not 5.6 anymore. It has an apparent light value of sometimes as high as 8.5 and 11. And that's where you get into the real problems. Okay? So again, if you're going to use this type of a light source, we want you to stay away from that. Okay? I find one of the best ways to get a point across is to do it visually. All right, so we're all photographers here, so that's probably the best way is just look at some examples of what we're talking about. We have, and part of this this video series is there is a testing procedure now in Easy Suite for submitting your green screen test. So we're going to talk about that just a little bit, but that's also part of what you can watch. On a green screen test, what you want to think about is use our lighting diagrams. Select the type of program you're going to shoot, be it close-up for the fall, half-length, head and shoulders, maybe 3/4 length for a spring program, or if you're going to do something a little bit different. Pick the type of program you're going to do. Pick the appropriate lighting diagram that you're going to use for that. Get all your equipment set up, and this test that you're going to submit it as though you're shooting a live job. Okay, these are sellable images because you want to create a test that we can actually see whether or not your images are going to be good enough for the knockout process. And the other side of that too, even though we're qualifying you for green screen, is you want to qualify us to be your green screen lab. You want to be sure that we're going to deliver the product that's good enough quality for your customers. Okay, so having said that, when you do your green screen test, we really want you're going to submit 5 images. We want you to submit 5 different images, not 5 images of one subject or 5 images of a mannequin or something like that. Take some time to do this right, because if you don't and you have problems, you go shoot a job and something happens, it's going to cost you so much time and effort and money to fix it and repair it that you're not going to make any money. Your profits will just go out the window on that particular job, and you may lose that client, that school that you're working for. So it's extremely important that you test exactly how you're going to shoot. So what I want to do is I want to show you some examples of some really good test images. Okay, so a lot of times somebody will throw a kid with a green shirt at us just to see what happens. You don't have to tell your customers not to wear green. When we run the knockout process on this particular image of this young man here on the left, that green shirt's going to get knocked out and it's going to become transparent. But part of our process at the lab is once the images are knocked out, the green background is removed so that background area is transparent. Then they come through a secondary stage where a human being inspects all of those images to be sure that the knockouts were performed properly, that we don't have any problems that might require art. That's where we'll catch a shirt like this being knocked out. That operator then will take the knocked out PNG file, take the original JPEG file, put them together in Photoshop, and paint back in the shirt. That's just part of what we do. We have to, because there is absolutely no magic pill to keep that shirt from knocking out. Okay? So that's okay to submit something like that. The girl on the right-hand side here, great way to test with somebody with red hair, because red, being kind of magenta, on the opposite end of the color spectrum of green, sometimes you can have problems with knockouts with that color hair. So good idea to do something like that if you can. Okay. The other thing we're looking for is you see this gal's arms. You can see her forearms or her shoulder area, so you can see how clean of a knockout the edge of the knockout will be. That's a real good way to test to be sure you're getting a good knockout. The girl on the left, obviously with really curly frizzy hair, that's fine. The young man on the right's got the spiky hair. Okay, because that's always a concern, is how much detail are we going to see around the hair. And then just another little girl with just average hair, just what little kids would look like. And these were all shot consistently in exactly how they're going to shoot their program. And you'll notice that there is no hair light used on these. Okay, and they look pretty good. Again, err on the side of being safe. If you don't want to use that hair light, I hate to keep beating the dead horse with this. Don't bother with it. The other things that we're really concerned about is exposure. Okay, in order to get a good clean knockout, we have to have as close to a perfectly exposed JPEG file, and you need to do a custom white balance. All right, those two factors are what you have to be able to do at the point of capture. All right, so you have to nail the exposure so that we don't have to, manipulate that file very much when it comes to color correction and density. And you want to also do a custom white balance, because then you'll get this really ugly color that's going to make it hard to knock out too. And I'll show you a real quick way that you can actually do kind of validate your exposure, and it's called a face mask histogram. And you just use your elliptical tool, your marquee, and you're going to marquee off some of the face, and then you want to come over and look at the histogram. Okay, and let me pull that up here again. Do the expanded view, and I'm just going to go to RGB. All right, so what we're reading here is we want to get proper exposure of primarily the skin tones. Okay, and for a Caucasian skin, this is a very easy way to measure it. It's going to be a little bit different for Afro-Americans, but with Caucasian skin, when I look at this histogram here, what I want basically is what just is referred to as a gap on the right side, and then a real gentle slope coming down to the other side to where there's a little bit of a gap there. This indicates to me that we've captured maximum exposure for the skin tone area of this particular image, which is what we're selling. We're selling, the child's face. So we've got proper exposure. So that's a real quick, easy way you can check for your exposure. And we do that, when we're looking at images. If we get images in that look too dark or too overexposed, we'll run a quick little exposure test on them, and we're going to send them back to you and say, hey, you need to submit again, because these will not work for a good knockout. So now let's go ahead and let's look at some images that would be problematic and show you some of the things that can go wrong. Okay, in this set of images now, we're going to look at some good images, some bad images, and kind of talk about what is good and bad about them. The top two images that we're looking at here are very good examples of a nice exposure on the subject. We've got good color. You'll notice there is a little bit of difference in the luminosity of the background, but both of these will work just fine. But I also want you to look at the hair light and just how subtle that it is. That's probably what we're looking for if you're going to use a hair light. Okay? Next two images down here, one on the left now, you can see we've got some wrinkles on that background. That's some fabric that they've just hung. You're better off using paper in a case like this. It can be tough also when you do groups to get enough light on your subjects that's going to fill in between there so you get a good clean knockout. If you don't, you're going to end up with dark shadows in those areas. This young man here on the right, you'll see some shadowing on either side of him. And when you get into the older kids, you'll notice that because of their size, and particularly if you haven't put an arm on a hip type thing, you'll get some shadows close into the body. Real simple way to fix that is just take your main and fill, and those are measured at, let's say, 40 inches off center, and just push them out just a little bit to the right and left, and then feather those lights out a little bit, and that'll help diminish those shadows from those the older kids. You can see that very easily. Okay, the one on the left is another good image. We've got a nice hair light on it. The one on the right is a real extreme case of problems with a wrinkled background. We can't do anything with that. Okay, it's just going to be a mess. You'll also notice that how cyan this image is. This image was probably shot on auto white balance, so we've got just a really ugly skin color to it. Remember, I want you to shoot a custom white balance. Okay, here we've got real exposure issues. Okay, you'll see how we've also got wrinkles on the background on both of these here. But what happens with the exposure issue is what we do is we run the image through our process to where we remove the background. We create the knocked out image. Then we color correct what's at that point a PNG file. That's just a file format with a transparent layer in the background that allows us to put another background in place. Okay, but in an image like this where they're so far underexposed, we have to open up the exposure, and what will happen is we'll start to see some green in these areas in the hair that maybe we didn't see before because it was so dark. So that's why it's really important for you to think about proper exposure and nail that exposure too. Okay? The one on the right, the other issue I want you to be sure you consider is if you decide to use a prop in the photograph, something like a chair can reflect the green from the background. Okay, so you have to think about, okay, is the chair I'm using very glossy? Do I need to spray it down with something so it's more of a flat sheen to it so it doesn't reflect the background? Because the chair will actually get knocked out partially and be somewhat transparent. Here's a couple of really extreme examples. The group shot on the left, obviously we've got this huge shadow over here that's going to be a massive problem. Plus, when we knock this image out, all this area that's green will be transparent, but we're going to see this stuff in the background. We don't know that you're cropping into it in any specific way, shape, or form. We just know we need to get a good, clean knockout. So that's going to be a real issue for something like that. So the point of that is fill the image with the background. Be sure you shoot it that way. And this is just a really good example of an overlit hair light, how strong it is. It's just way too bright. Plus, we do have some exposure issues. You can see that there's a little bit of blooming of that diffused highlight on his cheekbone there. Okay? One on the left, we've got some real issues with all of those wrinkles you see in the background. And found out specifically on this one that the customer had used an umbrella up above the subject for a hair light. Well, that light's just coming straight down, and it's going to magnify and intensify any bumps or wrinkles in a canvas background. Nothing you can do about that. The one on the right, we've got some real exposure issues, okay? That's just going to cause all kinds of problems. One on the left here, obviously, we've got a lot of wrinkles. And this one on the right is just to kind of show you an overall set of what it might look like. And you see these shadows here that are on the right and the left of the subject. We just kind of worked with the lights a little bit to push those out away from the edge of the subject so that they don't show in the area that's going to actually get knocked out. Both of these, we've got color balance issues, we've got too much of a hair light, and we've got wrinkles in the background. Okay? These are things we're going to avoid. Okay? Again, this example here, this is another thing that I want you guys to take into consideration is we have people that have shot green screen before, perhaps using another lab, or they've done it themselves, that sort of thing. And they say, well, I've shot this stuff before. I'll just send you an image from last year. Don't do that. Okay, this is from a different type of a process. We want you to use our lighting diagrams, our formula, so that you have success. And obviously the biggest problem here too is we've got all the space around the background that's going to be an issue. All right. One on the right is just a very extreme case of problems with color balance. Okay, shot on auto white or some sort of thing. All right. One on the left hand side here, again, fill the background with the fill the camera view, the frame with the background, the green screen background. Another issue that you can just barely see down here at the bottom of this red chair, there's a little tinge of red that's going to reflect into that. And this one here, we've got a really nice little hair light here. I think this is going to look really good, but we do have some issues with perhaps a wrinkle or two in there too. All right. And like I said, please don't send us something like this. That's not human hair. That's not a human subject. We need something that we can actually work with that's going to give us an accurate representation of the type of knockout we can do from your images. So as a wrap up, I've got a list of keys to success for doing green screen with H&H Color Lab. Okay. Number one, you want to test your equipment for proper exposure. So that means if I've got 2 or 3 different cameras I'm going to shoot with, I'm going to use all three of them for shoots. I want to be sure that I get them set up so that I know when I'm shooting f8 or f11, I'm getting proper exposure on each one of those cameras. Chances are they're all going to be a little bit different. In the resource area of the H&H website, you can find some information on how to calibrate your meter and camera together. If you're having some problems with that, you're welcome to call me at the lab at any point in time. I'll help you with that. The other key to success is you want to follow the lighting diagrams. Those diagrams are set up specifically to work with green screen. We've done all the testing for you. Doesn't mean things can't be modified a little bit, but you've got to have a starting point so that you can start off with some level of success. The other thing too is I want to recommend that you use all the recommended equipment. I'm referring to umbrellas. Don't use soft boxes. Don't use parabolics. I don't think those are used much anymore. But you want to use umbrellas because we're using a specific type of lighting to light the subject in the background at the same time. There's a reason that we recommend these lights and these light modifiers. You always want to shoot JPEG. You want to properly expose and do a custom white balance every time that you shoot, so that you get the highest quality image before it goes into the knockout phase and color correction and all that. Okay? Shoot your test exactly as you're going to shoot your upcoming job. So if I'm going to be shooting a 3/4 length for a spring program, I'm going to decide in my mind exactly what I'm going to do, and then my test images are going to be shot that way because I got to be sure that I can do this and do it correct so that I do a good job for my customers. The other thing, and you'll notice on our lighting diagrams, we've got all the measurements on there. As I stated before, you need to be consistent every time you set it up, from school to school, day to day, rig to rig at one given school, so that they all look the same, because we need consistency. Okay? And I can't stress enough, item number 7 is to custom white balance and expose properly. Okay? Those are probably two of the biggest keys to getting a good, clean knockout and delivering a product that your customers are going to love. Now, following this video, there's going to be some more information on the testing process and also about the actual 2013 green screen program. There'll be some information for you to look at that you can also find on the web, but I'll give you some descriptions about some of the new templates that we've come up with.